So when I was in the SEAL teams, I was a platoon commander, and one of our primary duties is, as a SEAL team, is something called close quarters battle. It's just like you see on the TV. The good guys go into the house, they go from room to room, and they save the other good guys who are being held by the bad guys, or we go get the bad guys, whatever the case may be. And what I had seen in the SEAL teams, at least partially, was that the officer in charge would always be in the house and directing everybody where to go. You go to this door, you go to this door, 3 people on this door, 2 people on this door, right side first, left side second. So I would do that, and I would run around, and it seemed awkward to me. It didn't seem right, but I did it that way anyway. And I'm going to tell you in a minute one of the major reasons why I did it that way. But anyway, I had a good relationship with my platoon at the time, and one of the senior enlisted guys came up to me and said, sir, do you think we don't know how to do this? And I said, well, no, of course you know how to do this. And he said, well, why do you feel like you need to direct every single movement in the house? Now, I've got a decision to make. I could have gone with the answer of, that's just what I've seen, that's what was been taught, and that's what we're going with. But I knew that wasn't the reason why, because I knew the way we were doing it was inefficient. I was in a moment where I had to say, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to trust myself? Am I going to be vulnerable? Am I going to be honest and let the chips fall where they may? So I thankfully went with the honest route and the vulnerable route, but it was scary. And I said, well, if I've got to be honest with you, if I'm not directing every movement, I'm not sure what purpose I serve. What good am I then? And he laughed. And that was also a very tense time, because I didn't know if he was laughing at me or what he was laughing at. So he laughed and he said, sir, we need you making more important decisions than which door goes first. He goes, you're needed in there. Let us do our job and sit back, and you make the big decisions, and you'll know which ones they are. And he was right. So I'm not saying my platoon, because we didn't, invented free-flowing close quarters battle, but we hadn't seen it yet, okay? And then we just said, okay, everybody go in and start making decisions for yourself. And when there's this big decision to be made, which, my guy was right, there was plenty, I'll make it. Other than that, just go in, everybody do your job. And a couple things happened. First of all, we got way better at close quarters battle because we changed the way we did it. It was more efficient. It was the absolute right way to do it. And then years later, when I was in the FBI, we saw that the best units in the world were doing it that way. That caught on pretty quickly. And then the other thing was, when I thought that the respect that I would have amongst the team that I was in charge of would go down because I kind of showed that vulnerability, it was the opposite by exponential. The fact that I was able to say, here's why I did it. I know it's wrong. I was a little afraid and I was insecure, and they just picked me right up. And then it was weird. I just became a better leader. So, that's a very important moment of vulnerability, being honest, and having some, I guess, moral self-courage to say, I'm just going to be honest here, because the other way, they're going to see right through it.
This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, go ahead.
Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger. I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all. Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Folks, welcome back. Another episode here of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I am Ethan Nash, and my father,
Michael Nash. Hi.
Here he is.
Hi, everybody.
I bet you all didn't know that I used to be a Navy SEAL and in the FBI. So I know we've gone, 35 episodes, and I haven't brought that up. Seems surprising.
Ethan, I'm your dad, and I freaking didn't even know that.
Yeah, I know. I live this double life. No, of course not. We have a terrific guest on the show today, Errol Doebler. Errol, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Ethan. Good to see you, Mike. And thanks for having me. It's truly an honor to be on your show, and I appreciate you giving me some airtime.
It's always fun for us to connect with others that are doing good work out in the world. So thanks for being here.
That was probably one of the more, exciting intros that we've had in a while. So I hope you all enjoyed that. We're definitely going to get back to that story and dissect it a bit. But Errol, I'll give the reins to you. Tell us a little bit more about your background. Then, of course, this new terrific book that you've wrote.
Okay, yeah, I will. So I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up on Long Island. I grew up on the water. And so there was always an affinity to the ocean. I ended up going to the Naval Academy, and out of the Naval Academy, you are required to give at least 5 years of your time to service. So part of that time was as what's called the surface warfare officer. I was on a ship first, and that's not what I wanted to do coming out of the Naval Academy. I wanted to be a SEAL. So I had to go through jump some hoops and laterally transferred to the SEAL teams, and I was with SEAL Team 4 and SEAL Team 1. So I was on both coasts, and I had intended on spending my career, my entire 20 years into the SEAL teams, but it wasn't to be. I got injured on deployment, medically discharged, spent years in the private sector, which I enjoyed. I was in sales and sales management. And then I was in the city on a sales call on September 11th, 2001, which changed the trajectory of my life in a lot of different ways. We lost my brother-in-law on that day, and my sister died of breast cancer 8 years later, but we always say that was really the day that she died. So I kind of felt the calling to get back into the fight, so to speak. So I joined the FBI, where I worked counterterrorism operations. I was based in the New York City office, but I worked primarily groups and threats emanating from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and the former Soviet republics. So see Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. And I did that for the better part of 13 years. Grew a little frustrated with the leadership in the FBI, even though I loved being a special agent for the FBI, which is something I like to really discuss with folks. And then I just had to make a decision. Was I going to tolerate leadership that I inherently disagreed with, or was I going to put my money where my mouth was and kind of formulate what I thought a good leadership process was that, was effective for me, and share it with people who cared about leadership? So that's what I did. In 2016, I started Leader 193, and here I am. And then we just put the book out. July 1st, I think it came out, The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. And it just breaks down what I believe as far as leadership goes. And that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. That's amazing. Errol, what's 193? Where did that come from?
193 is my SEAL training Hell Week class. So that's it. Just kind of paying homage to the SEAL teams in my own small way. And it was just a special time in my life. And it's a lot of where the good of leadership came in, but it's also, where I learned some hard lessons on leadership. So I just kind of like to try to keep that alive.
Well, we're definitely going to get to the book for one, as well as, your consulting firm. As I was reading the book, I couldn't help but write down a specific quote. Now, I'm going to read the quote. I want you to tell me a little bit about this. This must be a quote from maybe your commander or something like that. It says, "I won't be surprised if one day you are found drunk and dead in a ditch, or if you turn out to be one of the greatest officers this Navy has ever seen." What's the story behind that one? I just have
What's
to ask.
What's that all about?
Yeah, he said that to me. That was early on in my naval career. So I had a bit of it's odd. It's a true dichotomy. While I thrive in discipline, I do enjoy structure. Sometimes I feel like it had to be on my terms. So that put a little bit of a rebellious streak in me. And, that led me to do things outside of my best interest as a young man and in the Navy. So that was after graduation from the Naval Academy. And I was going on to surface warfare officer school. And it was hard for me because that's just not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the SEAL team so badly that I let the bigger picture get away from me, i.e. the bigger picture being, I've got to get through this part of my career and I've got to do it really well, or else I'll never get to where I want to be. And so I would have some ups and downs with that. Perhaps staying out too late during the week, perhaps scuffling a little more than I should have, basically conduct wholly unbecoming of an officer, and certainly a young officer. And so I got called before the desk, so to speak, a few times. And at one point they said, we're just going to ask you to leave. Okay, so there's the commanding officer of the school that I was at, Surface Warfare Officer School, and then the commanding officer of the base. The commanding officer of the school decided to just start lambasting me unnecessarily to the commanding officer of the base, and just saying how, thank God we're getting rid of this guy. And he's going to get somebody killed someday, and just on and on. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you doing this? So I'm just kind of taking it. And the commanding officer of the base says, okay, I hear everything you're saying. And he's about to kind of give the final death knell, so to speak. And I said, sir, can I say something? And he looked up like, okay, you could say something. And I just said, look, I made some mistakes. And I voluntarily said I would leave because I have made mistakes and I have broken your rules. I said, but I'm not that. I don't know why he said those things about me, but I'm not that. I said, I won't get somebody killed. And I said, I'm a great leader. I've just made some mistakes because I'm upset. And I'm not asking you to keep me here, but I'm not walking out of here letting him say that about me because it's not true. So the big boss, he goes, he says, okay, we're going to overrule you on this one. We're going to let this young man stay. And then he said to me, young man, I'll never see you again. So one more misstep, it's an automatic. You can just start driving home. I said, yeah, no problem, sir. Appreciate it. So we get back to the office. So the commanding officer who just kept beating me down brought me into his room, screamed at me, couldn't believe what had just happened. And another senior officer came in and he just said, can I talk to you for a second? And that's when he said it. I've never seen anybody like you. He goes, I watch you do things that are truly special. And he goes, then I watch you do the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. And that's when he said, he goes, I won't be surprised if one day you're found drunk and dead in a ditch, or you become one of the greatest officers this Navy's ever seen. He said, but you have to decide. And that was it. And he left. I was like, wow, that was hard. Like they're drunk and dead in a ditch. Jesus. Is it that bad?
That's pretty harsh.
That was harsh, man. But he said it, and, it all kind of worked out for me, right? And I know you all talk about change and change leadership and changes in organizations. Individual change, it's to keep the Navy vernacular going, it's an aircraft carrier trying to turn on a dime. It takes a while. So I wasn't without my missteps after that, but my head was in the right place. So that's kind of the story behind that quote.
That was a terrific story. And I guess the reason why that stood out to me is I couldn't help but think there's these themes that keep coming up with your stories throughout your book. And they really, to me, relate to emotions and managing emotions in some way. And you tell these great stories about kind of, trials you've been through with your emotions and having to get a hold of them. And we're going to talk about that today. But your book, The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. Tell us a little bit about this book, how it came about, and what's kind of the Reader's Digest version of it.
So, when I decided that I was going to leave the FBI, first of all, I didn't know what I was going to do because I was so frustrated with what I was seeing on many different levels, but I didn't know. I wasn't going to go back to be a street salesman again, right? I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And my brother-in-law runs a mid-sized company, and he's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? And I said, what? He goes, Errol, I pay a guy with half your credentials a bunch of money to talk to him once a month about leadership. I go, that exists? That's a thing? I had no idea that world was even out there. So once I knew that there was an avenue, and that could be my avenue, I very quickly put pen to paper and said, okay, what do I believe about leadership? And as you all know, because this is your business as well, you've got to be clear what you believe, and it's got to be sellable, and it's got to be transferable. And I was happy to see that, okay, yes, these are the things I believe. I believe them for a very personal reason, but I don't think I'm an outlier. I think that I'm not the only one who struggles with certain things. And when I came up with the process, right, emotions and cultural awareness and behavioral guidelines and planning and meeting the resistance, I said, these things for me anyway are everywhere. If I had accounted for these things in every aspect of my life, I would have avoided some real trouble. While those elements exist always for everybody, they'll be different. What's inside each one will be different. And I started just to read about the science and neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, wow, my process follows the process the brain goes through when it rewires itself.
That's great. There's so many parallels to what we do and what we talk about. It's really fun to talk to another professional that's doing the same good work.
There are a lot of parallels. And, when Ethan and I spoke, and then I was listening to some previous podcasts you all did, I'm like, well, there's a lot of people who believe this. And what the beauty of it is, it's just some people will like my packaging and some people will like your packaging, and that's good. As long as we're available for somebody who wants to get better, as long as there's options for them, I'm good with that.
I appreciate your focus on several things. I appreciate your focus on, it sounds really simplistic when you stop and think about it, but the focus on behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of management, I think, advice and training out there that's very esoteric. And it's hard sometimes to find a workshop or a leadership development process that really gets down to, let's get all these leaders on the same page, talking the same language, but exercising these same behaviors, right? And then coupled with your focus on neuroplasticity and the process of change. I think it's brilliant.
First of all, I believe behaviors, I just think that they are the basis for everything. Okay, we
Agreed.
focus too much on widget and how we're gonna get our widget better, or how we're gonna sell our widget better. And I'm not saying that's not important. It is, but you can have a foolproof sales process, but if your behaviors on top of that sales process aren't right, you're just not going to go anywhere. Talk about culture, right? People talk about culture all the time, and I said, well, how is that person not a cultural fit? Now, I know in my mind what I think. If you ask somebody that, they have a hard time explaining it to you. And what I tell people is, you've got to base your culture around the behaviors that you believe, okay? And they can either be behaviors that you're going to bring with you no matter what, or it's going to be behaviors that you're seeing. And if we just behaved in this way, would we get better? Boom, then those are your behaviors. So there's an art behind it. Everything should, in my mind, should be about behaviors. But why not evaluate your people on a set of behaviors that you've established for the company?
Yeah, I notice you talk a lot about expectations, which is the next door neighbor to behaviors, right? Really, really being clear about expectations. And I really appreciate that. That's super important.
Well, it is, because, and in the way I put it forward, as it relates to accountability, another word that's thrown out there a lot, right? Culture and accountability. And I just simply tell people, first of all, accountability is not consequence. Accountability is asking a question. Mike, tell me why you just did that. I just held you accountable. I asked you a question. Your answer will determine a lot going forward, but I've done my job. But then I tell folks, look, you can't hold someone accountable if they don't know what they're supposed to be accountable to.
Exactly.
We have to make it clear. And just start with behaviors and pick a few. 3.
Yeah, and respect is not a behavior, right?
No, it's not a behavior.
That's not a behavior.
Because that's a label, right? Okay, that's great. Tell me how you're respectful. Tell me how you have this culture of respect. Well, we say hello to each other in the morning when we see each other. Okay, that's something. And we don't interrupt each other when we talk. That's something. Okay, and we always consider everybody's opinion because we go around the room and we require everybody to speak. Okay, that's something. Yes, if you do those things, I could conclude that you have a culture of respect. Good. But yes, I am with you, Mike and Ethan. Our culture is respect. It doesn't make sense. It's not enough there. You can only put that label on it if you can define 3 or 4 things that you do inside of your organization that create respect.
Yeah. And focusing on behaviors has so many implications just across our culture, right? We talk a lot about, giving feedback is where the topic of talking about behaviors come up, right? If you're given feedback on, say, character words, right? You're lazy. Okay, well, that doesn't actually describe much, right?
Can't fix that.
Lazy can be a ton of things, but to say, you know what, you've consistently turning in, your work late, or, those are behaviors that we can actually talk about. So outside of just the culture, just being able to focus on those in all aspects of how we communicate, I think can go a long ways.
Once again, I couldn't agree with you more. That just falls right into what we just said. You're not a cultural fit here because you're lazy. You're lazy, right? I define lazy for, your mom's lazy, right? Let's duke it out. But what you just said, no, you have spelling errors in everything that you do, even after you're being correct. You're late with these things. You know what I mean? You're unprepared for this and that. Maybe lazy is the right answer. Maybe it's not. Maybe you just don't care. Whatever it is, here, the things you do doesn't work here, right? But that only doesn't work if prior to that, I've made it clear as the leader how we do things. There should be a set of behaviors for the team. But then each individual will have their own things that we don't necessarily need to burden everybody else with. As a leader, you've got to reset some new parameters for that individual. They need a little help. Give them that help. Here's what I expect. I expect spell checks. I expect complete sentences. I expect on time. And I expect you to be fully prepared with whatever brief, whatever it is. Okay, now those can be broad, but there's not a whole lot of wiggle room on those things. Those are going to be fairly clear. Okay. Next time you're not there, I said, what didn't you understand about not being fully prepared? right? I just held you accountable. It's a little hard way to ask the question, but now you've got an answer. Now we're getting to a point where we move from accountability to consequence. If your answers for the accountability questions are still bad and you just let it keep going and going and going, the things you say make no difference. As opposed to, okay, Ethan, this is the third time. We made it clear. I've reviewed these with you. Every time you haven't done it, I've brought it up. And every time you have the same bad answer, I'm afraid you're not a cultural fit. Then you could say it because you do these things and I asked you to do these things. You're just simply not a cultural fit. You're not bad. You're not good. You're just not a fit here.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, you're talking about these expectations. And oftentimes we find that managers who are reluctant to communicate those expectations are doing so out of some fear of coming across too harsh or being too, micromanagey or being too authoritarian. When in reality, what happens, of course, is if they don't set those expectations, they end up then having to continually have these conversations or redirect or give feedback or micromanage because the expectations weren't being met. So you end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot by not giving those expectations up front.
Yeah, given direction, people will behave how they want to behave, for better or for worse. I often say leaders don't hope and leaders don't make assumptions. Okay, so I hope everybody knows how they should behave. Right. Well, I just assume everybody knows that that's the proper way to behave. Well, that's a bad bet. That's a bad bet. Yeah. Why not just make it clear? And look, dictatorial, right? That's the other word that people use. I don't want to be dictatorial. You have to explain yourself as a leader. These are the behaviors where I'm going to hold everybody accountable to. Here's why when we do these things and we behave in these ways, here's the ripple effect it has, okay? At some point, leaders just need to make decisions, okay? There needs to be a baseline. You are the leader. The direction goes as you go, okay? So if you want certain behaviors, you need to make it clear. If you have certain expectations, you absolutely need to make it clear. If people don't like them, that's allowed. Then they are not a cultural fit for you.
I'm curious about where you see the place of, back to this sort of these feedback moments you're describing right now, where do you see the place of coaching and compassion and empathy and that whole other part of accountability and the connection piece? How do you meld that in with what you're saying right now?
Yeah. So look, there's two conversations kind of where I go, right? So the soft skills of leadership, which include the things you just said, right? The ability to show some compassion, the ability to show some empathy, right? The ability to put a velvet glove on that maybe.
And coach somebody along.
Yeah. Those are important. But if we don't have, in my mind, if we don't have the processes in place first, the behaviors firmly in place first, say, this is what I expect. Soft skills will do you no good. Because then you'll be just doing what you just said, Mike, over and over again. Okay, this behavior is not good. I understand. Good. You've got the best soft skills in the world. I would say to somebody, put the hard stuff in place first. Put the behaviors that you expect, because you are the leader, that you're going to hold people accountable to, get them in place first. When people are struggling with them, we go to the process, the resistance. I understand intuitively, not intuitively, I understand scientifically. As a leader, I am asking people to literally rewire their brains. It's going to take patience on my part. It's going to take firmness on my part. It's going to take consistency on my part. It's going to take an iron fist, and it's going to take a soft, gentle touch. Okay, we understand that dichotomy in those two things, but only then, if I have a basis for how I am showing empathy, for how I'm showing compassion, then in my mind, we're just wasting those good soft skills, because there's got to be a center focus of it. So tell me what you need. Tell me what help you need. Those excellent soft skills, that empathy, that compassion has to be centered on something first. Center it on your expectations, and then, in my mind, put those soft skills to use.
Yeah. Now, Errol, we've kind of danced around the topic of emotions and how those relate to, behaviors. And I know this was a part of your book that really stood out to me. Part of your process, or one of the steps, if you will, in your process, is the awareness and recognition of emotions. Mm-hmm. How does that relate to behaviors and behavior change?
Emotions drive our actions. And if we're not aware of those emotions, then our actions are random. And that's why I think process is so important. Without process, whether it's a thought process on identifying how you're feeling and what you're doing, whatever it is, whether it's my leadership process, if you don't have some type of process, you can't go back and figure out where things went right and where things went wrong. Something went really good and all you're doing is just randomly acting on your emotions. And I say, tell me why that went well. Tell me what steps along the way made that happen. You're not going to be able to answer it. Why did that go wrong? If you have process, you can go through and say, oh, you know what I didn't do? Right out of the gate, I didn't check my emotions. And I just acted on that emotion. I didn't stop, didn't consider how I was acting. I just acted. You have that process. You can make that adjustment. So for me, I know everybody has emotions and I know everybody acts on the emotions. So let's just say, right, Mike, one day you just hand me some garbage, right? I'm your boss and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what is this? But then I say, Mike, everything okay? You're like, yeah, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. And maybe I press, right? That's soft skills a little bit, but I'm seeing something different. And I can ask the question. Finally, I say, Mike, are you sure everything's okay? Because this just doesn't seem like you. Well, yeah, my dad just called me and he said he's got cancer. I no longer need to care this piece of garbage that you handed me, Mike, because there's a whole other issue now. And I only know that because I didn't focus linearly on a end product. I said, okay, what would drive somebody to give me something so bad? There must be something else to this. And there is an emotion somewhere. If I can find that emotion, then we can start dealing with the real issue. In this case, in this example, the real issue is not the bad product. The real issue is somebody you love just got diagnosed with a deadly disease. I can throw this piece of product away. It's irrelevant to anything we're going to talk about now. What do you need?
Now you're taking the empathy and the compassion part of management and you're putting that front and center. Right.
That's
perfect.
Right. That's based on emotions, right? So if we're recognizing in ourselves the idea that we can do this with the people around us, but not do it with ourselves is, I don't know the science behind that. I'm going to find it because I'm sure it's out there. But I can tell you, if anecdotal experience means anything, then you can't convince me ever that somebody can have that awareness of emotions of everybody else around them, but they don't do it with themselves.
So you're talking about an aspect of emotional IQ here, right? Emotional IQ, it's defined often as my ability to recognize my emotions and my ability to recognize the emotions of others, and then to make good choices based on that information, right? What have you done to hone your skills of becoming aware of your own emotions?
There's a couple things. For me personally, and this is why, part of what I put in the book is Wim Hoff Method, right? And the Wim Hoff Method is breathing and cold exposure and mindset. If you have a big tub full of ice water, you are preparing to get in, I can promise you one thing, you are going to have an emotion. And that emotion may be varied. You may have several conflicting emotions. And when you get in, you're going to have an emotion. And when you get out, you're going to have an emotion. And if your intention before you do this cold exposure is to say, I want to focus on how I'm feeling. I want to be able to identify and articulate how I'm feeling before I get in, how I'm feeling inside, how I'm feeling after. Now you are practicing emotional awareness and recognition. And if you do that every day, now it's a habit. Same thing with every element of my process. The next one is cultural awareness and recognition. Culture, in my mind, is made up of, like we talked about, it's made up of the things you do, not the labels you put on them. And if you are not aware of the things you do, for better or for worse, without judgment, then you can't make the targeted adjustments you need for leadership growth, behavioral growth, personal growth. Got to come from those painful areas of awareness. But again, as far as how do you practice that, how do you hone that skill, same thing. Before you get into the cold shower, before you get into an ice bath, you're going to do something that you don't normally, you're going to walk around in circles. You're going to all of a sudden realize you haven't flossed your teeth in a while. Go floss my teeth a little bit, right? You're going to do some type of procrastination. You might go, get yourself all psyched up. The point I'm making is simple. There's no judgment around what you do. All the drill says is, what do you do? When you get in, what do you do? Do you make a real show of it? Oh, cursing OF, OS, OF, OS. Do you tense up and do you get really calm and breathe nice and easy? What do you do? Right? Metacognition, being aware, having an emotion about your emotion, having an awareness of what you do. It's just kind of you outside looking in. The other thing you're going to find with that cold exposure drill, and as it relates to the emotions you feel and what you do, is it's going to mirror a lot the things you do in day-to-day stressful situations. Not 100%, but it's going to. The point is, your mind doesn't wander in the cold. You can't hide from it. So if you're going to focus on one thing and your mind wanders, there's no escaping it. You will notice that your mind wanders because the cold doesn't allow you just to go in a different place than you originally intended. But that's how I practice honing those very difficult skills of awareness of emotions in what we do. It's how I encourage the people I work with doing it. They don't always do it. And then I have something else for them. I say, well, the cold has already exposed something about you. You're not even getting in. And what have you just learned about yourself? Right? You've learned that you won't even give something a try, or it's too hard, so you're not even going to do it, or you'll continue to make excuses, right? The cold will set you free because it does not lie.
So basically what this is kind of an extreme method for putting your emotions front and center, right? And so you can feel them, you can experience them. But you're finding that, from, the Wim Hoff method, taking cold baths, that translates into a situation where, say you're a leader, you're in an intense meeting, someone's holding your feet to the fire, ability to recognize those emotions in the moment, in that extreme moment, and allow you to make better decisions because you're aware of that. So there's a crossover there that you've seen in your practice.
100%. So if I am in a chaotic situation, right, at work or whatever it is, and then that adrenaline, that stress starts to kick in, and then you will be compelled to start doing something. Okay, that's when the emotions, right, of stress start to take over, when you don't recognize it, when the pressure starts to get too much, and you just either you acquiesce to what somebody says, or you get overly aggressive against somebody, whatever it is. But if you have conditioned yourself to recognize the noise around you and learn how to calm down, every time you get into an ice bath, what's happening? You're having an induced panic attack, right? It is natural. It's science, right? That fight or flight response, okay? The adrenaline just starts kicking through your body. You start to shiver, right? That's all induced by the noise of the cold. The cold has no agenda. The cold is just cold. We're the ones who put the emotion around it. That's no different a philosophy than that example we just gave in the boardroom. The noise around you is just the cold. The noise has, now look, the people might have some agenda, but it's still the same. We're still going down the same parallel tracks. It's still just noise, right? You still have to understand your emotions. And if your emotions are running wild, you have to say, okay, I know what to do. Every time I get into a cold bath and I get that induced panic attack, I know the process, right? Right? And the whole thing, and I know the science behind it. So now I know how to do that. I can do that with people screaming at me, and I can do it because I can do it by myself in the cold in a 32-degree ice bath. I can just get calm. It's the same concept. And awareness. Oh, wow, I'm starting to get really stressed out at these people screaming at me. Hold on a second. Just noise. They're not going anywhere. They can wait as I breathe and collect myself, right? They're definitely not going anywhere. So they can wait. Right. So it's the same concept. Yeah.
Yeah. This is interesting, and it's a really unique perspective. I mean, before I had read your book, I hadn't actually made the connection there between the ice baths and, becoming more aware of your emotions. The other week, we just did a whole episode on, mindfulness and how that relates to leadership and becoming more in control of your emotions and aware of it. Now, some may consider that a little bit less extreme than your method, but others might not. But, the ability, to sit down and practice just paying attention to what's going on with you, right? And maybe you're not doing that while sitting in a cold bath. Maybe you're doing that because you just got out of a really tough feedback session with an employee and you're feeling a lot of emotions. To sit down and actually identify and articulate what you're feeling. So I guess my question to you is, do you have other methods, besides this one that you work with on leaders, given that not everybody can take a cold bath any type of the day, right? I might be able to do that in the morning or at night, but what about integrating something throughout the day?
Yeah. So, it varies, right? So I believe very strongly in using the cold as that tool. But that being said, it's a means to an end as far as the leadership application goes as it relates to my process. So we have an app, just like a million other apps out there. I use it for our business, but I just have them. It works like a text message. At least 3 or 4 times a day, we need to hear from you. What is your emotion? Just pick one. It doesn't even matter. I don't care what it is. You don't even need to understand it or explain it. I just need to see an emotion, right? A few times a day through the course of the week. Now, at the end of the week, we'll have a discussion about it. If I'm forcing you to write down 4 times a day as part of our drill for leadership, your emotion, and you're doing the work, you're going to start to be like, wow, I never realized that I was constantly pissed. Mm-hmm. And I never realized that every time I was pissed, I walked around like this, right? And I snapped at people. You know, you're automatically going to be making those adjustments. So again, whatever technique or tool we use to create that awareness is good. Okay. I have my different things that I do. That's one of them outside of the cold exposure. The other one is, in the form of a daily question, right? I don't even know what person I learned this from, but I learned it from somebody else. At the end of the day, if emotions are your thing, did you do your best to recognize your emotions throughout the day? And it's not a linear yes or no, right? I think that's a very important distinction, because if we keep getting no's, then we're going to get frustrated and we're just going to stop.
Right.
Yeah, we're just going to get discouraged. So recognizing that, grade yourself 0 to 10. 0 is not only did I not write down any emotions, I didn't even think about them. The word emotions never even crossed my lips. 0. That's okay, because now tomorrow at least you could try to do better. You could try to get a 2 or a 3. So those are a couple of the other tools that I use, but probably the same thing everybody else uses. The reason is because they're good, right? Mm-hmm. They make sense.
Yeah, I've done exercises, I would say, in the same ballpark as that. Basically what I do is I'll wake up, and usually in the morning is when I might be, for me anyways, at my most stressed, right? I'm thinking about what I have to do for the day. I got a lot of things on my mind, thinking about what happened yesterday, and just taking literally 5 to 10 minutes and just writing down everything I'm feeling. Right? It's just kind of like a brain dump of everything that's going on emotionally, any self-doubts I'm having. And that, just articulating it, just putting it out there on paper clears my mind for the day in a way that I'm now able to put that aside and act in a way that's actually going to kind of put me towards my goals that I'm trying to reach. And so that's one thing I've done. And it does, over time, it's kind of built in this muscle that just makes me think about like the emotions I'm feeling that morning when I'm waking up. These skills and behaviors that we discuss, they don't just apply in your leadership role, right? They apply when you go home with your kids, with your partners, with your spouses, right? And also what I'm hearing there, to go full circle, is a bit of what I would describe as vulnerability, right? The ability to kind of put your pride to a side and say, here's what I'm feeling right now, right? And now in your opening story, that is what I gathered from it, is that you had a moment of, I need to be vulnerable with my group here, with my team, or bad stuff's going to happen, right? And so with vulnerability, I mean, is that something that you see as an outcome of paying attention to your emotions? How does that factor in?
Well, this is why I really like to stress when I say the process of leadership, it's not just a term I threw in there, because really, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is a behavior. Vulnerability is a behavior that will make you better, especially if you realize, based on your emotions and your personal culture, that you're not vulnerable. And the reason that you are struggling so much with your wife or your kid or whoever else is because you don't have the stones to say, I'm feeling really afraid right now. If you were, based on what I noticed about myself, more vulnerable, would I be better? So it's an answer, non-answer to your question. Will being more emotionally aware make you more vulnerable? Maybe, but only to the extent that you identify that you need that behavior based on what you have observed about yourself, based on your emotion.
There's something else in your story about, once you were vulnerable, how the other men felt toward you, the respect they gave you. And I think that's really key. We've worked with managers for years who almost believe that if I do my best to not be authentic, I'll be doing the right thing, right? do my best to just show up as competent and in charge, and I know what to do all the time. And you end up, those folks end up actually not being respected as much because they're not being human, they're not being authentic. It causes people to actually not trust them as leaders because they're not actually showing up as their true selves. So I really appreciate that part of your story. The vulnerability helps us bond with our people.
Well, it does. But it's still, we've got to be careful, right? We can't be bleeding hearts all the time and just be pouring out our souls to our people. Like, you can be afraid and then say, I don't need to show this fear. I need to acknowledge my fear, but I need to move forward, right? Sometimes people need to see that courage. But when you're stuck, when you simply don't know, that's where vulnerability will help you.
So many times in my coaching relationships with a manager, they'll be talking to me about a situation and they'll be saying something to me like, I'm feeling this and I don't know what to do, regarding this employee, or I'm really frustrated about X, Y, and Z, and I don't really know how to have this conversation. And it sometimes seems like the last thing they choose is to just say to
just
the
to
employee,
say that, right?
What's going on, right?
I am at a loss.
Is so refreshing, right.
You're allowed to be, team, I'm at a loss. I'm super frustrated and I don't know what to do with this situation, right?
And the trick there is saying it, not showing it, right? Say it as opposed to act it out.
Right.
Acting out your frustration, right?
Right. You can't, there's got to be some measure. There still needs to be a measure of control, but those are two different conversations, how you're feeling and what you're doing, right? Are you acting on it? You've got to make a decision on how you want to act. So that's, vulnerability is important, but in the end, vulnerability is just nothing more than a behavior, right? That may not be your challenge as a leader.
That's terrific. Any last words, anything that you want to say to the audience here to close it up?
I do, because and you're not going to like this, but I'm going to do it anyway, if it's okay. The
Please.
Story that you were telling growing up about cleaning the kitchen and your dad would just make you go back and do it again. I just was laughing because it's what I do with my kids. I told you this is what I wanted. You didn't do it properly. You got to go back. If you had just done it correctly the first time, based on what I told you, we wouldn't even have this conversation. You'd be doing what you'd want, but now it's taking you longer because you tried to shortcut me. It works. It's taken a long time, but once they realize that I'm not going anywhere on that, he's starting to get it. And so I guess if I had to leave anything with anybody, that's the consistency based on the expectations you're set. And have some patience with it, but be persistent. It'll work itself out if it's clear.
Yeah. Patience is key there. I'm almost 30 years old and I finally got it. So, I finally can clean the kitchen well. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Errol. The book, again, is The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. Go buy a copy. Terrific book. And again, thank you so much for being on the show, Errol.
Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it. This was a good time.
Hey, folks. This is Ethan. Hey, one last thing before you go. I wanted to let you know about a new offering that we have available. We are now offering a group coaching service. You don't have to go at it alone when it comes to the rewards and challenges of leadership. Whether it's navigating a sticky situation or finding creative ways to motivate your employees, we found that being part of a leadership group can help you discover collaborative ideas, get support, and contribute to the success of others. By exploring group dynamics and key leadership skills in real time, group coaching can elevate your leadership to the next level. So we're going to get this going probably at the beginning of 2021. If you're interested in exploring what it would look like to be a part of a group coaching community, please reach out to us. You can contact us at contact@nashconsulting.com. Again, that's contact@nashconsulting.com. We're really excited about this one. We've been putting in a lot of hard work to make this a really valuable experience for folks. So reach out to us. All right, that's all. Thanks.